Herzlich willkommen zum Technologieplauscherl bei der Cloudflight. Welcome to Technologieplauscherl at Cloudflight. We'll be starting in a few minutes here. We'll have Stefan's and Christian's talk before the break, then we'll go over the community news, and in the end there will be Martin and David's talks after the break. There will be food in the break, obviously. There's a lot of beer and drinks in the diverse fridges all around. Please feel free to spread around the whole floor. If there's any more people who want to come to the front, there's still a few places in the front left to sit down. That's basically it. Stefan, take it away. Oh, sorry, one more thing. If you do not want to be photographed, please approach me or approach Johannes there, Yoshi there. He will not photograph you then, or if we'll take a photo from you and delete you out of the photos afterwards or something like that. We'll find a solution.
Just wait.
Working now? Turn it on. Okay, welcome to today's first talk. Asia yourself, there is a lot to learn. My name is Stefan. I'm working at Cloudflight for more than 10 years now in the role senior software developer, always doing something on the technical side. At the beginning, Matthias already introduced a little bit about Cloudflight. Happy to see the office so full today. So let's dive into it. Microsoft Azure. I want to start with a short story at the beginning. Basically, around some years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Munich and to visit the Microsoft Technology Center there for some talks, for some presentations, for some workshops. In the morning, when I checked out from the hotel, there was no one at the reception, but there was such a doorbell or desk bell. Basically, I think everyone knows it. Very few software in it, more on the hardware side. Solid technology, dates back around 150 years, has proven that it's working. Not a lot of moving parts, but let's go on. At the end of the first day, there was a little catering at the Microsoft Technology Center, and an issue came up. The issue was that there was no more food, but gladly, there was a small button in one of the corners of the rooms, and it said, if you have any issues today, just press me and we will help you. So this is exactly what I did. I pressed the button, nothing happened, I pressed it twice, and then I saw on the other end of the room, someone was busily looking at the smartphone, coming over to us and saying, oh, there is an issue. As I was really curious, and it says here, it's powered by IoT services, details on the back, I turned it around. And I was really impressed. I was impressed how this small button was working, how much software was in it, resulting in that at the end of the room, someone got a notification. Not sure if it was a Teams notification or an SMS. It was some kind of a notification. And what you can see here is basically the architecture, that how this little button was set up. It's using a lot of native technologies that are available on Azure. And for me, in a way, I was impressed. It's more my area, it's more on the software side compared to the desk bell. So I immediately fell in love with all this stuff. So the next chapter begins with all these new exciting technologies. Some years ago, we also started in our company at Cloudflight to focus a little bit more in the area of cloud computing, mainly targeting Microsoft Azure as a cloud provider there. And what I would like to share a little bit in the next few minutes is some of the learnings, some of the pitfalls, but also some things that you have to be cautious about when using services on Microsoft Azure. As a reference project, let's have a look on a basic IoT platform. I have briefly created a short drawing. I think it's what you would mainly expect when talking about an IoT architecture. On a cloud, on the left side, you have a variety of IoT devices, from the washing machine to the car to whatever the device is. The device is coming on the cloud side via an IoT hub, going two ways, storing the stuff in a data lake for every use case that's there on the data science part, but also as a backup of all the raw messages in case you need to replay some events, in case you need to recreate data. Then could be based on Azure functions, some kind of an ingestion pipeline, doing transformations to the events that we get from the IoT devices. In the end, storing them in some kind of a data store. Here in this example case, it could be a Cosmos DB, which is a NoSQL database hosted on Microsoft Azure. And then, not going into detail here because it's not the focus of today's talk, could be a Kubernetes cluster hosted on Azure where we have some supporting microservices, some supporting user interfaces facing to the customer, presenting the data that we stored there. So what comes next after drawing a first sketch of an architecture? From my experience over the last few years, it's the pricing calculator. Because on every cloud provider, you have a lot of different opportunities how you can solve, how you can tackle different issues. In the end, it's important to also, from the beginning of a project, have a look on what's your load model, how much events do you expect, how much data do you want to store, what will the infrastructure cost in the end. So let's have a short look on how does the cost calculator look like. 1 second. So basically, you have here a cost calculator. Wrong screen. Sorry. So better like this. So here we have a cost calculator provided by Azure, where we can have a look at a combination of different services, giving them different resources, giving them different storage options and so on, and seeing what will be the monthly costs there. And so just to show how it's working, let's say we want to add a Cosmos DB to our setup. Just select the technology or the managed service here. And then in the cost calculator, we have to define some parameters specifying the service more. Let's say here we are using a Cosmos DB with the SQL API. We do not want to have a constant throughput, but we want to have an auto-scale option, and we are writing to a single region. I will come to those things a little bit later. Then we can define what's the estimated load that we have there for how many hours, and what's the average utilization that we are expecting from the service. Let's go back and say we expect that not 250, but that somehow we are using 25% of the maximum power we are giving the database. And then immediately we can see we are storing this in one region. Don't care about the backup stuff at the moment, but we can see the monthly rate we will have to use for this database. And basically, from my experience, this is very important to have an eye on the costs, also from the beginning. Because as nice as an architecture is, and the combination of managed services you can use, be it on Azure or be it on AWS, in the end, you also have to challenge it with the costs. What's the budget that's there for a technical solution? So, going back to the presentation. One second. So, the cost calculator. Sorry. So, the next argument for the clouds. One of the things that comes immediately to mind when using managed services on the cloud, or generally cloud services, is it's a good thing, because you are only paying for the IT resources that you need. You can deliver the right amount of IT exactly when you need it. Scale when it's needed, create resources when it's needed, everything is fine. Basically, the same thing is also written on the Microsoft homepage. Top benefits of cloud computing. I marked the important stuff here, the right amount of IT resources right when they are needed. So to be honest, this is also one of the first things that we are always telling customers that are not sure should we move to the cloud or not. At the beginning, one of the arguments is you're only paying for the resources that you need. You're only paying for the stuff that's really important for you, and you can scale anytime. So we thought. Then, during one of the recent projects, we tried to create a Cosmos DB, a NoSQL database, everything fine, infrastructure as code with Terraform, executed everything, and then we got this message. Sorry, there is a high demand in your region. There are no more resources at the moment. So, a little bit shocked. Because why shocked? It takes away one of the main arguments, scale anytime, scale when it's needed, scale when there is more load. I do understand that this happened this year around May or June when there was a general shortage in the Western Europe region for Asia, but still, it's something that you have to consider. Of course, you can scale anytime, and we were able to solve this problem with two ways. I will come to them on the next slides, but you have to keep this in mind. So not every argument is true 100%. You also have to consider such situations. Luckily for us, we did two things. The first, contacting the Asia support, that they white label us for this subscription or for this region, so that we were able to provision. It took about 3 or 4 days until they responded. So in between, we had another plan. We found a nice guy up in the north who had some more resources. And in the meantime, we provisioned our database in Sweden, which somehow had more resources. Okay, so now that we had a Cosmos DB and NoSQL up and running, we were able to use it in our projects, gain experiences there. And on the next few slides, I would like to share the one or other thing that I personally find important when using a Cosmos DB as a NoSQL data store, like we did in some of our IoT-focused projects. So as written at the top of the slide, we are using the Cosmos DB as a hot path storage. So we are only having the events from the various IoT sensors in a NoSQL database for some limited time, but not forever. What's really important there to take care if you are dealing with a multi-tenant IoT scenario is to separate the data in different databases. For me, there are 2 reasons to do so. One is sometimes customers do not really like to mix their data in one database. That's one of the points. The other one that is for me at least that important is that when separating tenants into different databases in the Cosmos DB, we can scale the databases individually, meaning a tenant that's producing more load on the query or update side gets more resources as a smaller one, and you are silencing the noisy neighbor. With a noisy neighbor, I mean, if you would have all the tenants in one database and one tenant is producing enormous load on the query side, therefore bringing the database server down, it would affect all the other tenants on this database as well. By separating them in different databases, it's guaranteed that every database is isolated and is not affected by the noisy neighbor problem. One thing that we learned that's really important to take into consideration from the beginning of the setup. The second thing that's turned out really nice is the retention policies in the Cosmos DB. As I mentioned before, we are not storing the data there forever, but we defined a retention policy, meaning we do not have to take care actively when the data is removed from the database. We can define on a container level how long should the documents be stored in the database, and we can even override it on a document level, saying specific documents in the database should be there longer. and the Cosmos DB itself takes care of removing everything in the background. The monitoring of the whole Cosmos DB is really nice in the Azure portal, meaning in application insights, where you can see summaries of failed requests, requests overall, how is the distribution of data and indexes. So really nice from the operate point. One thing that's really important, also really important to consider with the Cosmos DB, are the so-called request units. For all who are hearing this for the first time, request units are some kind of a virtual currency that you are dealing with when using the Cosmos DB. They abstract somehow the CPU cycles that you get and the RAM usage of the database. It's abstracted in a so-called performance currency, the so-called request units. Every insert, every update, every delete operation on the database consumes a specific amount of request units, and on the database level, you can define how many request units should the database provide on a per second base, and the more money you pay, the higher the request units can be. One thing that we learned there is the value for the request units is not only influenced by how much queries, how much select statements do you do on the database, but also how much storage in the database do you consume. So the baseline, the minimum value that you can set there, there is a formula you can calculate what's the minimum amount of request units to use. So for me, the lesson there is sometimes it pays to read the manual till the end and not skip in the middle. And for measuring those request units, from the beginning of developing services that insert data, that update data, that select data from the database, we have put an alerting in place using the Cosmos SDKs, be it Java or .NET. It's available on all of them. You can read the consumed request units for every operation and do something with the value. What we did is produce log statements when we are above a certain threshold with the consumption of request units, and have a simple Azure alerting there, which is sending either emails or push notifications to an alert group saying, hey, there is somehow an increased query complexity. Maybe someone should have a look there. Is there an index missing? Is the query too complex? Just to have this in focus. One thing, in addition for the Cosmos DB, are the so-called index policies. So I think everyone is familiar with indices from the SQL side, creating an index on certain columns. That's also true for a document-oriented database like the Cosmos DB. What's important to know there is that per default, if you're doing nothing, then the Cosmos DB is indexing every field or every attribute in every document that are inserting. This is, of course, nice from a query point, because you know that most of the queries will be fast, as every field is indexed. But on contrast, it increases the RU, the request unit consumption on the insert side. So that's why you have to take a look. Should you create your own index policy, or is it fine to index everything? For changing the index policy, it's important to know that it takes time until the index change is up and running. So you're pushing a new index policy, and then it depends on the amount of data that you are storing in the Cosmos DB, as well as the amount of available request units, to give you an estimate how long will it take until the index transformation is up and running. Can be minutes, can also be hours. It depends on those two factors. Why is this important to know? It's important to know because there is one thing that's, for me, or at least for me, really special. If you're doing order by queries, you need to have an index present. Without having an index, it doesn't mean that the query is working slow, but it's not working at all. So if you're doing an order by last name, for example, and there is no index on the last name field, it means that the Cosmos DB is returning an error and not executing the query. So basically, from the deployment point, you have to find a way to bring the index change to the Cosmos DB, wait until it's done before you're rolling out a new microservice that's maybe expecting this index to be up and running. Solvable, but can be a little bit tricky. One thing that's working there is you can send an HTTP request to the Cosmos DB with a special header attribute set, which is basically this document DB collection index transformation progress. And if you set this HTTP header attribute, you get an HTTP result with a response header set that's saying, I already transformed 40%, 45% of the index. So this is the way that you can find out how much of the index progress has already been done. Stepping back to the Azure portal, I can quickly show you how this is looking to make it not too theoretical. What we have here is the Azure portal viewing one of our Cosmos DBs. Here in this Cosmos DB account on the left side, you see we have different databases. The name here is always a number. And below, we have different containers. For one container, I think I already opened it in the settings, we can see that we have a time to live enabled, and we can also have a look at the index policy. So the index policy that I mentioned is nothing magical. It's a simple file where you can go two ways. You can include specific paths that you want to index, or what has been done here in this case, include everything from the document and define some excluded paths that are not relevant or that are then not indexed. And at the bottom, you see that we also have some composite indexes defined, which are needed for the order by queries. This was the index stuff. Then in the settings of it, in the scale settings, quickly showing you the auto scale option. So you have two possibilities that you can do. You can either select an auto scale, meaning the Cosmos DB will scale in a specific range of request units, or you can go for manual, which would mean you're giving it a fixed value there, and that's the maximum request units you can use. If you enter here, for example, 1,000 request units, this means that the database will effectively scale between 100 RUs and 1,000. If you need more power, you can either change it here in the Azure portal. You can use the SDK to send a request incrementing the maximum request units on the container level, or you can also do it via the command line using the Azure CLI. And for the queries, I just wanted to show you 3 or 4 quick examples focusing on where is an index, where is the index needed for. So the first query, a rather simple one that I want to show you here is, it's just selecting documents from our container where the documents have a specific partition key and a specific element name. In this example, as you will see in the query statistics, we have an index set on the element name. And what I showed you here, going to the query stats, this is one thing that I learned that's really important when you want to analyze the performance of certain queries, when you want to find out where do we have a potential performance issue, how can I optimize a query. So basically what you see, you get the result, basically all the documents that it found, and you can have a look at the query stats. And what I see here for the query stats is in the first, how many request units have been consumed, how many results were found, and the most important part is, has an index been used? And what we see here is the index hit count. From the index, we got 29 documents, and above you see that the output document count is also 29, meaning all 29 documents that we found with this query have been supplied from an index, which is good, or performant. If we are doing the same without an index, let's just query, let's make a count on the whole collection and filter out all the documents that have a partition key named error. So here we get 1602, meaning in this partition we have 1602 documents in place. Just remember this number for 1 second. And now what we are doing here is we are querying on the same partition key in the error partition and filtering there not the element name, but the element status. If I execute this query, I get no results. Okay, can be. As you can see here, the request charge is immediately higher. Before, when we went to the index, we had 8, now we have 90. Can be fine. But anyway, let's have a look. And here we see the retrieved document count is 162, basically the number we had before. And in the index hit count, we see 0. So this means we have proven here that on the element status, there is no index. There is no index that can serve this query. And what the database had to do is go through all the documents, basically the 1602 documents, to find out, is there one with an element status TS4? So this is basically something that you will have to use, or that you will have to face at some point, finding out how you can optimize some of the queries, where do you have potential performance problems. And if I would do now, as a last example, select on the same partition key and now order by the element status where we already know there is no index, we will get an exception. So it's not working at all. On the SQL side, it would work. It would be maybe slow, depending on the amount of data in the table. But for the Cosmos DB, it's not working at all. Okay. Testing the Cosmos DB. How can you test that everything is working fine there? What has proven for us to be of crucial benefit is we are using the Cosmos DB emulator within test containers, same as we are testing the Azure storage with Azure RIT to do our integration tests. It's working really nice. But you have to also be aware that there are some limitations. The emulator is working really nearly like a real Cosmos DB, but it's not 100% the same as using using a real Cosmos DB on Azure. For example, one thing that we find out, there is a date time bin function in the Azure Cosmos DB SQL that you can use for grouping date time fields, and this function is not yet available in the emulator. So this is bad if you want to test this function in a test container setup. As far as I know, they are currently working on this, but this is something that, at least from my experience, you have to expect. Emulator is not working 100% like the real deal. That's why, in addition, we also have end-to-end tests set up in most of our projects, and most of the times they are using a real Cosmos DB, meaning before the end-to-end test is run via the Azure SDK, we are creating a temporary database, ensuring that there is some data inserted there that we need for our test, run the end-to-end tests against this well-known world set, and then tearing down the database again. Yeah, this is the 5-minute mark, perfect, or not. Yeah, last slide for the Cosmos DB, just because I wanted to mention here, and I find this really brilliantly done. If you want, or if you come in contact with the Cosmos DB and you want to know some of the concepts, or you need to present them somewhere, you need to explain them to, I don't know, a product owner, a potential customer, or even yourself. Under this link, just Google for Cosmic Notes. At least for me, I really like, there are around 70 such comic-style drawings that's explaining the main concepts, from easier stuff like request units, where can I find the request units, to more complex stuff like how to schedule a Cosmos DB in a geographical worldwide setup. So really nice to see there. So as we are now running out of time, I will just briefly go over the Azure functions. This would be the second part. Maybe there is some time at a beer afterwards if someone is interested. Just to mention two of the main points because that's important for me. When using Azure functions, there are two things that you really have to take into consideration. One is logging, basically boiling down to what do you really want to log from Azure function executions, especially in the IoT area where we are dealing about millions of runs per day. You have to really carefully think what's the most important information that you need. Is it okay that you are doing sampling, meaning that randomly some of the runs will not show up in any logs? So this is one area that shouldn't be forgotten. And last but not least, for the Azure functions, it's also important to think about what happens during the redeploy of a new function, especially in IoT scenarios when you're using Azure functions for continuously processing events, doing some kind of ingestion. You have to think about what happens if the function gets restarted. It can happen on various occasions. You are deploying a new function, or it could also be that the runtime on the Azure side is being restarted. So you have to think about what to do then. I mean, the obvious recommendations is avoid long function runs and be on the idempotent side, which is easier said than done. But you have to think about those as well. And it's also mentioned on the Azure manual. Just one possibility that you can deal there is you have the possibility of injecting a so-called cancellation token, which is notifying your function run as soon as the function is being restarted. And then you have, not saying anything stupid here, but I think the limit is then 10 seconds until the function is really killed from the time the cancellation token is distributed to all running function runs until it's really a hard kill. And you can listen to this function, this cancellation token, and when you get it, they are noting it here in a funny way, like take precautions, which is also easier written than done. But this can be one option, how you can react on the restart of an Azure function. Yeah, so basically, this would be it from my side. I hope it was not boring. I hope there was some interesting stuff in there. If there are any questions, just please ask them now or afterwards with a beer. And one reminder at the end, we just today released or activated the registration for the new coding contest, which will take place on the 31st of March next year. So whoever is interested in a good coding challenge, go there and register. Thanks. Sure, I can repeat the question. The question was, is the Cosmos DB emulator working on Linux as well? To be honest, I have used it only on Windows till now, so I couldn't tell. I'm just thinking, I mean, we have integrated it on GitLab, and they're running on a GitLab pipeline, so I think this should then be, I guess it's a Linux, but I would have to look into it. But what was the problem? Was it generally not working, or because I?
Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago where I had a look, and it was just like, yeah, if you wanted to use on Linux, bad luck.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't say it now. One thing that costed some time is not associated to Linux Windows, but for the Cosmos DB, you have two options of connecting to the Cosmos DB. You can either do direct connections or via a gateway. And in the test container setup, you have to add some ports to the test container setup. If you're using direct mode, there are 4 or 5 ports that need to be enabled on the test containers so that you can connect there. This costed us some time, but there is documentation. If you ever stumble into this. Okay, then I guess we're going on to the next talk. Thanks.
So while the next talk is setting up, we got the microphone working again. I'm not sure why. It wasn't on purpose, I promise. There will be office tours after the food. So if you want to do an office tour, either find me or find Maria after the food in the front triangle. Maria is in the back there, raising her hands, and we'll do office tours from the first floor after food, before the talks after the break. So without further ado, it's going to take a minute. It's fine. Get yourself a drink and come back, and we'll have another talk. No, it's live streamed. I can't. All jokes I know are not good for the internet.
So, Scheiße. Ich habe gerade meinen Hauptbildschirm verloren.
Hast du den Bildschirm verloren?
Ja, ich bin jetzt auf dem erweiterten.
Ja.
Kann man den mal da aufbringen, den anderen?
Was brauchst du von uns dafür?
Wo ist jetzt der andere Bildschirm quasi?
No, correct.
Das ist
Let's make room.
it's connected.
Can we try that one?
No, it's because I'm not mirroring. I have a second monitor, but this one is now the second.
I don't know how you switch monitors on Mac.
Can you turn that one on?
It's turned on.
It's this one. Okay.
That's the reason why I said please try it different than that one.
Ah, no, I have it. Ah, fuck. Where is it? Okay, let's just stop the mirroring. Okay. Sorry.
When you tried it a few times before, the adapter was the problem.
Okay, that's
with the other computer.
Oh, sorry.
So, warte mal kurz. It was there.
Yeah, no, it's. Wait, los.
Ja, wenn man es auflegt vielleicht.
Wir müssen das Fenster von den Systemeinstellungen wieder rüberkriegen.
Okay.
Also das Fenster wieder rübergeschoben.
Perfekt.
Hat er nur das Switch wieder weg, weil jetzt schaltet er nämlich auf eine Auflösung, die das Ding nicht kann.
Okay.
Sie müssen die Bildwiederholfrequenz runtersetzen. Aber warte mal, ich habe noch eine andere Variante.
Ah, ich habe einen.
Probier mal den, ja, steck den ab.
Okay. Achso.
Warte kurz. Just a second. Gib ihm.
Neuralink MS. Okay. Das spiegelt jetzt.
Ist der trotzdem am Stream? Ja.
Does the microphone work?
Ja, Sekunde.
Ja, ist mein Mikrofon.
Warte. Ja, that's it.
Zufrieden?
Yo. Cool. Sorry, some technical difficulties. I'm now ready. Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. Oh, I'm a little bit nervous. My first Technologieplauscherl talk. There's a lot of people, but it's also awesome. Thank you. So, today I'm going to talk about building the crawling system I wanted to have. Let me first briefly introduce myself. My name is Christian Olia, or basically everyone who knows me calls me Och. Don't question that. I was previously working as a web developer for 13 years. I'm now in the process of building a business based on crawling or web data. You can find me on Twitter at Olia, or if you are one of those who are fleeing from Twitter because of the recent development there, I'm also on Mastodon as Och at phpc.social. Sorry. Yeah, from the Mastodon server I chose, you can guess that my weapon of choice is PHP, and that's also the language that this library that I'm going to talk about is built with. Before diving straight into the library, first let me quickly explain the two terms, crawling and scraping, because they're often mixed up or used synonymously. Crawling is the term for the process of loading documents and following the links in them to load those linked documents as well. And scraping is the process of extracting data from those loaded documents. I prefer to use the term crawling. Some people actually do both things in separated processes. They first crawl a lot of pages, maybe save them or just have them in memory, and afterwards try to scrape things off of those loaded pages. I don't really like that approach. Doing so, you're passing documents twice, because for following the links, you have to pass the document to get the links. And you're probably unnecessarily using a lot of disk space or memory. And also from my experience, a lot of people also intuitively do it like me, combining crawling and scraping in one process or program. And instead of always saying crawling and scraping, I prefer to just use the term crawling. I also thought about mixing the terms up to something new, but I then decided against the term scraping. Why I started building a crawling system. I built crawlers in my day job since around 2008. Back in those days, it wasn't really that nice. But over time, a lot of helping libraries have been built and released in PHP. To name a few, of course, famous Gazelle HTTP client, Symfony DOM crawler component, and also two scraping libraries from Symfony called Good and Panther to crawl with HTTP client or headless browsers. And yeah, but for me, there was still missing something missing. Some of those libraries mainly focused on the crawling side of things, and some were only on the scraping, and most were only built for loading documents via HTTP and parsing HTML. In my job, we also needed to get documents via FTP or sometimes other strange things, and we also needed to parse XML, JSON, whatever documents. And also there was basically no implementation of a polite crawler bot, or in general the crawler and bot things, parsing robots.txt, getting sitemaps from there and stuff. There wasn't really a lot. Then I started the project in 2018, and first I definitely thought a bit too ambitious in the beginning. I wanted to build all the components myself, the UL parser, HTTP client, DOM library. And I also actually started with building a UL parser. It took me way too long, but I'm really happy with the outcome. The UL package, you can pass ULs to objects, so you can access and modify all the components separately from scheme, host, path query, fragment, everything. It also works with internationalized domain names. You know, you can have umlauts, or basically any UTF-8 characters nowadays in domains. Your browser in the background translates to something called Punicode. The package also handles this, and it even can tell you the subdomain, domain suffix, or top-level domain part of the host. For this, it uses the Mozilla public suffix list, which basically contains all available top-level domains. That's necessary because it's not easy to automatically get the top-level domain, because it can have multiple parts like COUK, or it can have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 parts. So yeah, you need the list for that. It can resolve relative paths, so links that you find in documents against a base URL. It also provides an advanced API to work with the query string. Yeah, if you have to work with URLs in PHP, definitely check it out. As it took me way too long, I then decided to go on with the actual crawling system and using existing libraries like Guzzle and so on. Over time, I've built a lot of customized crawlers for pages with very different structures, and I wanted to build a system that doesn't make any assumptions about the structure of the pages you'll crawl, but just assist you with all the typical challenges you'll face when crawling. And the basic idea then was that everything your crawler does is a step. So loading is a step, extracting data is a step, and those steps, you can imagine it like simple functions. They get an input and may or may not produce one or many outputs. The library provides already a lot of common steps that you might need when building your crawlers, and they can be arranged to build your custom crawlers. As mentioned, a step takes one input at a time. It can get many inputs, but always one at a time, and may yield outputs. For example, in this case, let's say the step tries to find schema.org structured data objects in the source of an HTML document. In the middle, it doesn't find anything. On the left, it finds one schema.org object, and on the right, there are 3, so it has 3 outputs. And one step's output is the next step's input. Or for the first step, you have to define the initial inputs manually, but then the next step gets the outputs from the previous step as inputs. And within your crawler then, which is basically a skeleton that you fill with the steps, the data cascades from one step to the next. I hope you can see the source code on the left. We instantiate a crawler class, define some initial inputs, which most of the time will be some URLs. Here, 2 URLs of crawler.software documentation pages. And then we add steps to the crawler class. First one is an HTTP GET to load those URLs from the initial inputs. Then the next step is an HTML GET links. That argument is a CSS selector. You can also use XPath queries. You can see it in the documentation how that works. Get some links matching that CSS selector. And next step is loading those found links, and finally extracting the title from the first article in that document. And finally, you have to call crawler run, and it's important that you iterate over the return value from that crawler run method, because the return value of the run method and also from all steps are generators. Crawlers are often very long-running and memory-consuming tasks or programs, and therefore the steps have to return a generator. When I started building the library, I built a crawler that went up to use more than 4 GB of data because of loading a lot of pages. And yeah, refactoring it to generators, it went down to max usage of below 0.5 gigabytes in memory. So if you ever ask yourself who the fuck needs generators, crawlers do. If you haven't heard of generators before, quick excursus. Functions returning an array, return the whole array and all its elements at once. So it has the whole array in memory. And functions returning a generator yield element by element. And so the first returned element or output, as we called it before, can be processed further by the following steps before the program has even created the next output it will produce. Then the crawler class, you always have to define your own crawler class because this here extends the HTTP crawler class, which is abstract. And you always have to define at least your own user agent. And that's also a bit of a decision. If you use a bot user agent, it will automatically load the robots.txt for all the hosts that you're crawling pages on and follow the rules defined in there. And if you use the other class that's just called user agent, it will not. You can give it then basically any browser user agent or whatever you want. And yeah, via the crawler class, you can also customize the loader and the logger and some other things. The loader, currently the package ships only with a HTTP loader. I'll probably also build an FTP loader, maybe also a file loader. And yeah, by default, the HTTP loader loads pages using the Gazelle HTTP client, but you can also switch to use a headless Chrome. Under the hood, this uses the Chrome PHP, Chrome Composer package. For that to work, you also have to have a Chrome executable installed on your system, or Chromium. And the loader is also home to the politeness features, which also have some settings. You can configure following robots.txt and such things a little bit. You might have already thought, what about pagination? Because in the cascading model, that doesn't really fit in. But of course, the library has also got you covered. I've just recently developed a new feature, a pagination feature. You can just call the paginate method on any HTTP method step. In the background, this creates a simple website paginator that is shipped with the package. You can also write your own paginators, but yeah, you can give it a CSS selector just for the next link or also for the wrapper for a whole pagination. It will memorize all the URLs that it already loaded. Yeah, just paginates through them. There's also loops, which was previously thought for paginating, but I'll probably remove that before version 1. So let's not talk about this. Yeah. Another feature is step groups. So if you need to feed multiple different steps with the same input, so basically from one page, extract things or do anything with different existing steps. So a good example would be you want to extract data from HTML elements, but also from schema.org JSON LD object within a script tag in the source of the HTML document. There are steps for that, but there are 2 different steps, but you can just put them in a step group and combine the output afterwards again, so it acts then basically like one step. Composing the final crawling result. By default, the final results are the last step's outputs, but sometimes you may need data from steps, multiple steps in the chain. For example, if you crawl some listing and there's some title only in the listing and additional data on the linked detail page, yeah, you can do that when using the add keys to result or set result key based on what kind of output step produces. And if you're calling one of those methods, the library creates a result object, adds that the data from the output to that result object, appends it to the output object, and it follows it along until the end. And later steps can add their data to the result object. Writing custom steps is very easy. Need to extend the step class and implement the invoke method. It gets one input with type mixed. It can basically be anything, and returns a generator. As you can see, it uses the yield keyword because of the generators instead of return. And optionally, you can also use the validate and sanitize input method to validate if the step can work with the input it's getting, and sanitize it somehow. And every step has a PISA3 standardized logger interface available as this logger. The library has politeness built in, so in the HTTP loader at least. The default HTTP crawler class automatically loads robots.txt files and sticks to the rules if you use a bot user agent, as already mentioned. It also has a throttler and waits a little bit between requests, and the wait time is depends on how long the previous request took to be responded. So that's pretty nice, because if the server that you're crawling is starting to respond slower, your crawler also crawls slower. You can also set it to null if you don't want, but it also reacts to 429, too many request responses. Servers can also send a retry after header to define when you can, the client can try again, try loading the page again. And it respects that retry after header, and it retries at max twice, and if it's still 429, then stops. The logger is already mentioned. In the crawler class, you can define your own PISA3 logger, or just don't do, then the library uses the CLI logger that it ships with, and which produces the output on the command line, as you can see below. The step class that you extend if you write custom steps has some functionality that then every step that you can use on every step. Of course, so one of that features is filters. You can filter the outputs. Outputs not matching the filters aren't yielded on to the next step. In this example, we're getting Queen albums from a JSON document, getting title, year, chart positions in UK and US, and we only want to get the albums where the year where it was released is greater than 1979, and albums that have been #1 either in US or UK. Another feature you can use with every step is getting unique inputs or outputs. If you don't know what inputs a step is getting, you can call the unique input method to, so it will memorize all the inputs that it got, and just don't invoke itself with duplicate inputs it's getting, and the same is with unique outputs. When memorizing and the inputs or outputs are arrays or objects, it builds a small checksum string to not blow up your memory because of this feature. You can also define a key from the array or object, so this performs better then. Stores is a convenient way to store your results. As previously mentioned, you always have to iterate in a loop over the results that you're getting from the call to crawler run. If you're defining a store, you don't have to make that loop. You can then instead call a method called run and traverse that internally has that loop over the run and the results and calls your store that you've added to the crawler with every result. And yeah, in the store method of the store, you implement also your own logic to store the result. Caching is another nice feature for development, or I've discovered that it's maybe not only cool in development, but yeah, you can add a PISA-6 standardized cache interface. The library also ships with a file cache implementation that you just give a path to a directory where it saves all loaded HTTP responses as files. Yeah, and can then, when pages are loaded once, you can rerun your crawler and it's fast because you're not waiting for actual HTTP responses. And demo time. Hope this works. Oh yeah. Oops. Where's my mouse? Do you see it? Oh yeah, it is. Oh, that's weird. Oh, it's gone. So, I've built a crawler to crawl the Technologieplauscherl website. So here, this is the Plauscherl crawler class as mentioned, and we define the bot user agent Plauscherl crawler. And I found a few different ways how we can get all the past talks and speakers from the Technologieplauscherl website. The first one, see how we instantiate the crawler class, give it the archive page as the initial input, then yeah, load that archive page, get links from item class cards, class card, which are the elements or the links to the event detail pages of all the Plauscherls. Then another HTTP GET to load those detail pages, and then extract all the speakers and titles, and yeah, finally run it and print the results. So PHP, demo PHP, let's see if that works. Cool. As you can see, it's polite. It first loads the robots.txt, then the archive page, and then all the detail pages. Yeah, it's taking some time. Just mentioned the cache before. I've already loaded all the pages before the meetup. Let's comment this out. And here we set the file cache and points to this cache directory here. Yeah, let's just try this. Ooh. Okay. Better?
Is there a possibility to zoom in?
I think in the terminal, not, no. Sorry. Yeah, but when running it again, you can see it's really fast now and prints all the past talks and their speakers. Then I've found another way to get to all of this. I've seen in the robots.txt there it lists a sitemap XML, so we can also it contains all the pages of Technologieplauscherl. Yeah, then it loads the sitemap. Then there is a step sitemap get URLs from sitemap, and add a filter to that where the URL path matches a regex. It should start with a slash and then a digit, a number. which is the scheme for the detail pages of the events. Then load those detail pages again and extract speakers and titles and print them. Let's try this. Demo 2. And it works again. It also lists today's talks because the detail page of today is in the sitemap, but not on the archive page already. And then there's another way. Can enter at the archive page again. In the HTTP steps, there's also a crawl step, which basically just crawls the whole website, follows all the links that are on the same host. You can also restrict that crawl step, as it's done here. With should only load pages that where the path matches that regex, and again extract speakers and titles and print them. Demo 3. Oh, nah. And again, works without today's speakers talks. Yeah, and then just wanted to show you the store feature. So this is again the same as in the second demo with the sitemap, and at the end we add a JSON file store that is shipped with the package, and we call run and traverse instead of run, and the JSON file store points to this data directory. Yeah, and we now have a file here, which is in one line. Let's reformat code. Yeah, and we have all the talks and speakers again in the JSON file. And the last one is a bit more complex. We not just get all the talks and titles, but we get all the events with date and location, and again all the speakers and talks, but inside the event objects then. And also save that in a JSON file. Let's run this. It is. And now we have an object per Plauscherl event, and speakers and talks as an array inside that objects. Cool. That's it from the demo. Just a little bit more about project status. Version 0.7 is already in the pipeline with a lot of nice features and improvements. And yeah, I'll probably drop a few things and plan to take version 1 somewhere in the next months. If you maybe want to contribute, some low-hanging fruits would be filters. I could think of a lot of filters that can be added. Or of course also steps. If you have any ideas, just approach me anytime to discuss ideas, maybe later today or on Twitter or on Mastodon or via crawler.software. If you have any need or idea for crawling, try it. Yeah, there's a lot more features that I haven't mentioned yet, and if you do, please tell me what you think about it. The docs are on crawler.software. Thank you for your attention. Thanks. Are there any questions? Oh, it was first. Okay, then let's start in the front.
Maybe it works. Hello, hello. No, it doesn't. Does it work? Does it work? No.
Hello. All right, yeah, thanks for the presentation. My question is whether your crawler acts like it's a web browser or really says, okay, I'm a bot, basically, because when we did some scraping, there's the option to use like Selenium, for example, to pretend like you're a browser, or you just are honest and say, I'm a bot. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, you can do both. Also, from the user agent, from the HTTP header user agent that is sent, you can just set anything you want by using the user agent class. If you use the bot user agent, it is a bot user agent. And from other things, you can use a headless browser under the hood. So, yeah, I think there are still things where you can identify a headless browser crawling, but yeah, it's better than by HTTP client. And next one.
You had basically what I think a finite number of steps that you could define. What if you want to crawl like every page that is below a given subdomain? I guess. Does that work? Like, can you have a loop until you have like every page somehow?
The HTTP crawl step, if you just do add step HTTP crawl, that loads all pages linked on a subdomain on the same host. You can also restrict it to the same domain, then it would even switch to other subdomains on the same domain. But yeah, that crawl step would load all pages that it finds and links somewhere.
Okay, so it like also loads if you have like a tree of pages. What I was thinking, it only loads one page and then it looks up all links that are on one page and then loads the next set of links.
Yeah.
But what if you have like a whole big tree of like unknown depth? That works.
It would just load every link until it doesn't find any new URLs. You can also give it a depth that it only loads. If you say depth 2, it loads all the URLs it finds on the first pages that you give it, and then all the pages that it finds there, and then it stops.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. Thanks.
And another one.
Maybe one question. Is JavaScript executed or not?
If you use the headless browser, yes.
And how do you know then if the site is finished the loading?
It internally has listens to some rendered event or something, I think.
Some rendered event, okay.
But yeah, that's done by another composer package under the hood. It's called Chrome PHP Chrome.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, another one.
How do you deal with authentication if you need some credentials for the page?
I don't. If you want to authenticate, you can. You can use all the HTTP steps with headers and bodies, whatever. But I have no built-in functionality to log in or anything. Or could be a future feature. And another one.
Yes, I have one question. So I have never used crawling in my lifetime, and usually when we're talking about crawling, I think about Google, and obviously there are many use cases you can use these techniques for. But as you have mentioned, you have been doing that for quite a long time. Could you give us maybe some samples where you had business cases where you used crawling?
A very common thing is to monitor your competition somehow, monitor prices. You can also, of course, build some meta platform. like flight search, job platforms or Immobilien things. Yeah, there are a lot of use cases.
If there are any questions from the stream, please post them again, then I can read them out loud.
I'm confused.
Don't be, sorry.
Okay.
Somebody told us there was a question in the stream, but we can't find it. So
okay.
if there was a question in the stream, I don't know.
Yeah. Just contact me on Mastodon.
Yes, yes. Perfect.
Yeah then, thanks.
So thank you very much for the first two talks. There will be food now and more drinks, of course. Most of the food has labels. It says either vegetarian or vegan or meat on it. Those octagonal things are vegan, but it doesn't say it on them. So those are vegan as well. There is food both on the tables in the back here, and if you go around near the entrance, there's like a triangular table. There's meat and food and drinks there as well. Feel free to distribute in the whole floor so it doesn't get too crowded and too warm here. We'll meet again in about 45 minutes again here to have the last two talks and the community news. Ja, ich leg's einfach, wenn es nicht mehr bequem hast, drauf. Okay, and because the question has been asked twice already, the toilet is in the hallway from the entrance to the kitchen. So if you see there on the left side, there's the toilet. Otherwise, ask anybody with a Cloudflight t-shirt.
Luckily, I don't have one. No, it says coding skills. It says Cloudflight. I just see coding contest if I look down. Maybe we could put my computer up there. And the camera will just homepage. Yeah, but it doesn't say that we're
No stress.
Yeah, you can try it out.
Hello? Yeah, I think it's working.
So I'll turn it off.
Hello, hello, hello. We're going to start back in a minute or two, so please feel free to come back, grab another beer or drink of your choice, and fill the front rows again so the speaker isn't alone. Follow Harald's example.
I'll be with the joystick like going.
Yeah, there is the camera, so I can't go over there.
No.
Okay. I should stay in the.
It goes 360.
I can go.
You can go everywhere.
You cannot hide from this camera.
Okay.
He will sweat because he has to figure out the controls and see from there.
Maybe
Let's see who's faster.
Du meinst einstecken? Achso. Brauchst du zum Runternehmen? Ich hab zwar 4 Stunden geschlafen und gestern zwar. Aber dein Verein, das muss aus dem FF gehen, oder? Du musst, wenn ich dich in der Nacht um 2 aufweck, nach 1,5 Stunden Schlaf, musst kommen, aus der Pistole geschossen.
Bei den Verwertung gesagt, dass du immer über Series A noch redest.
Ja, genau. So, thank you everybody for coming back after a break. I hope you liked the food. Any feedback on food and drinks, please give it to me or to Maria. We're very glad about it. Any time, any feedback at all is appreciated. As is customary, we want to talk about the community news as first point after the break. There's a few announcements this time. There's two new two new associations formed in Linz about technology in the widest sense. One of them is Neuron AI, and they will do a hackathon on the 9th of December at JKU. And the other one is 0XA, yes. And they want to talk a few words about that. Keep it short.
Yes, I will. Thank you. So today I want to just really quickly introduce you to the 0XA Science Association. This is a club we founded recently because we students felt at the JQ that there was a lack of possibilities of going beyond what we were learning there. And now we are bringing together a group of people that is a growing group of people, and we organize workshops, talks, and hackathons. And with this 0XA acts as a platform for interesting topics that people might want to present. If you're interested, you can visit our website 0xa.at and consider joining our Discord while you're there.
Yeah. And on January 13th?
That is his part.
I'll charge twice for that.
Yeah, so on January 13th we have our next event. It's a workshop in the Grand Garage, and we have 4 workshops about different topics. One of them is going to be about hardware near programming, another one is going to be about game hacking, and definitely very exciting. You can go to our website, we'll release the sign up link next week, and you can sign up there. There's a limited number of places, about 35, so make sure to get your place there. Thank you.
Awesome. We'd love to see you all there. It's really cool. It's gonna be really cool. And the next announcement, Technologieplauscherl, next Technologieplauscherl is already planned. It's gonna be on the 26th of January at Ubitech. Warm cheers for that. Yes. And last but not least, we are going to do another Socrates. The next Socrates will be probably on the 7th of July. Location and date is not completely fixed yet, but you can pencil it in already. We'll give you more details as soon as you want, as soon as we have them. If you want any more details about Socrates in general or want to know what it is and stuff like that, come to me or come to David, and we'll be very happy to talk about it for ages. You'll have to stop us. So, without further ado, I'll hand over to Martin to hold the next talk.
So, hello from my side. Everyone can hear me? Perfect. Welcome to my talk. It's the first talk for Technologieplauscherl today. For me, also the first one. And I hope you can understand me. It's my first talk in English after, I think, 3 years or something like that. If you have some problems, please call me and say it to me. What I'm talking about, accessibility, essential for some, useful for all. I think it's a very important topic, and I will introduce it to you today. The agenda for today, first I will start with why accessibility. For whom accessibility? Maybe some of you know the European Accessibility Act is coming in a few months. Then how to be accessible, what you can do, examples, standards, and process. That's the agenda for today from my side. First, to start, a few words about me. I'm currently working as an IT architect at Raiffeisen Software. I did my bachelor and master thesis in computer science with accessibility focus at the GKU. And currently, because I feel a little bit lonely, no, just a joke, I'm doing my PhD and try to do their maturity modeling as a work. I started a few months ago, and I think it's a work for the next few years for me. And last but not least, I'm W3C invited expert for accessible platform working group. It's a very long name for only a few, I think, contents. And my part is to contribute to the W3C maturity model, which is in the draft status up to now. If you like, you can look at it, but it's only a very high-level process state model. Like if you know, the CMMI model is another case of that for more general IT models. Yeah, accessibility is very important. I don't know if you know, in Austria there are nearly 20%, and every third person older than 60 affected by a disability which influences their life. I know it's a very high impact for many people, and it's not only permanent. I know many of you may know, yeah, it's permanent to have only one arm. But if you're drunk or something else and you are insured, you have an arm injury and you have the same case. You can only handle some things with one arm. But think of that, you got a child, then you have only one arm because you have to be there for your new baby. It's only a disability in some way. And yeah, all things we do consider these things. It's the same for if you're blind. It can be the same if you're distracted during driving. Please consider always all accessibilities and disabilities. It's not easy to handle, but I think this picture can make a first step into it. It's only a thing which can be permanent, temporary, or only in a situation for you. Maybe some questions to start further into the talk. I know it's very personal, so you don't have to answer it, but is there anyone in the room who have a disability? No one up to now? Next question. Who knows anyone who has a disability in their life? That's many more. Nearly everyone. As mentioned before, nearly 20% have a disability. And the last question, who is coding or working in his/her company with respect to accessibility? Any international standard? Yeah, it's a few people. Better than the last talks I hold up to now. Normally there is no one showing their hands up. What's coming from a perspective of law? The European Accessibility Act, or called in Austria the Barrierefreiheitsgesetz, is coming. It's from the European Union, will be in force after the 28th of June 2025. And it's an act to have more accessibility on some organizations and, for example, banking services, e-commerce, transport services, ATMs, and other self-service machines. There it is absolutely necessary to be accessible. It's not concrete defined how to be accessible, but every company has to say, yeah, we are accessible and how we are accessible. That must be defined here in your terms or something else. And yeah, of course, if you don't being accessible, the product, the service, or anything you are serving can be removed from the market, or you have to pay fines. And yeah, there again, in the European Union, 1 of 6 people have a disability, and 80% of them are not visible. And therefore, the European Accessibility Act was a very important thing for the community of disabilities and their people affecting them. The part 2, in the European Accessibility Act, it says that products and services must be perceivable, robust, operable, and understandable. That's the only thing they mention on how to be accessible. We have here on that later on how to fulfill that with a standard or something else. And, as mentioned before, it's necessary to provide information on how to physically access self-service terminals. It's necessary to be not only in the code part and also to come there. For example, the buildings. If you think about the bank or something else, you must know on the homepage or something there on how to come there and how to really get there. Sometimes it's not really possible to get there. And yeah, if the software is accessible, nothing helps you if you can come there. And yeah, only to be there, the law must not be for small companies. They are allowed to ignore the law. But as mentioned before, you ignore nearly 20% of customers if you ignore the law and say, yeah, I don't think it's important for me. How to be accessible? Yeah, first to know is a step-by-step process. You can say, yeah, tomorrow I'm accessible, I'm developing, and yeah, everything works fine. But yeah, you can make very soon quick wins. You can always try to integrate it in your routines, and you will really fast see some steps forward. And yeah, the people will also see it for you and they say, yeah, it's better working, but maybe sometimes I'm missing. And therefore, you can integrate accessibility in your process. For example, in Scrum, you can do it in your definition of ready or in your definition of done to say, yeah, accessibility is important for us. If we use some other library, it's important that it's accessible. Before it's not accessible, we don't use it. Also for the definition of done. If our software is not accessible, we don't deploy it, or we don't say, yeah, the customer can use it. We rework it or re-architecture it or something else. I know the definition of done is sometimes lots of things, but I think it should be there also for this very important topic. And yeah, sometimes saying, yeah, the developer should make it accessible. Yeah, please do it, and yeah, it must be accessible. But it isn't that easy. It's also important that everyone in your company tries to help you to be accessible. Managers, developers, testers. All together define an accessible product. Not the developer, not the tester, only all together. And here, on the high level, you have Scrum and maybe other processes define goals for each term in your company and how to be accessible. For example, you can hire people with a disability to say, yeah, we get some feedback from them. We make them visible and say, yeah, they are there. And it's not only our customers which we can't see, and yeah, we maybe hear from them from some calls or something else. Make it visible, define it in your processes, and really try to make your company accessible, not only for product, on the whole thing. There's a perfect statement on accessibility from the W3C, that accessibility, usability, and inclusion only works together. They create together a web that works for everyone. The goals and guidelines overlap. Sometimes they are not the same, but only together they can really address a web that works for everyone. It's not, you can not make usability without accessibility. You can do accessibility without inclusion, but you will miss something. Please try always to make it that way. See that three, accessibility, usability, and inclusion always together. And try to do that in your processes. Yeah, I said before, there are some standards on how to be really accessible. Yeah, it was a high work to doing some web content accessibility guidelines. The name is maybe sometimes a little bit misleading because the web content accessibility guidelines are also applicable to other things like web mobile devices, and the PDF guidelines are also containing some of the guidelines. But the name is up to now Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The current version is 2.1. 2.2 is coming in a few months, and 3.0 is an editor draft, which is going to be more the general way, which really say, yeah, all platforms are contained in that guidelines, and we are removing away from our web content accessibility guidelines. And to make that a little bit easier, there are 78 rules in there. 2.2 will add 9 extra rules, and these 78 rules are divided in 3 levels: A, AA, and AAA. And yeah, I mentioned it before, these rules are structured in that 4 rules which mentioned in the Barrierefreiheits- or European Accessibility Act. The perceived, robust, operable, and understandable. Therefore, you can use these rules to say, yeah, we're accessible. Yeah, you can use others too, but I think that's the easiest way. That's a common standard on international companies, and they're all using it. So have a look at it and try to really say, yeah, we can use it. Normally, AA is considered as internationally accessible. AAA is for some pages not even reachable because there are rules which cannot be reachable for some pages. For example, there's language label B2 which cannot be considered for very technical informations because, yeah, B2 means you can understand it in a level which is below your mother language. And yeah, some content is always in mother language because it's related to some content which is not really understandable for non-mother language talking people. Yeah, to have a look, if you don't ever heard of that guidelines, yeah, you open the page, yeah, the standard have 36 pages. Yeah, that's a really big thing. But yeah, you can open the how to understand the standard. There you can read 250 pages. Yeah, that's a little bit more. Yeah, maybe you get the next step and say, yeah, I will meet that standard, I understand it on the high level, and yeah, now I want to have some how to meet it examples and so on. Yeah, another 300 pages. Yeah, really, if you want some techniques or failures on HTML or Angular or something else, yeah, there are 800 pages to read. And now it's on the first few, it sounds really embarrassing and not easy to see. But if you really work with them, you can see, yeah, you can always open it. You can say, yeah, I want to reach rule 78, and yeah, there are these techniques, there are these failures. Yeah, please have a look at that, and yeah, the next time you know it, and you don't have to look again. See this as an only thing to have a look at it, and not, yeah, really trying to read that at one time and yeah, say, yeah, read all of that stuff together. For me, I never read all 800 pages of failures and techniques. I think I have read before 300 pages or something like that during development and saying, yeah, that's important now, and now I will use that in that case, and now I have that failure, what can I do, and so on. Maybe to have more examples, what are some examples rules in that standard? For example, it's important to have some color contrast between back and foreground. The minimum is there for double A is 4.5 to 1. For triple A, it would be 7 to 1. That means, for example, on that slide, it's a blue background with white. I think that's around 5 contrast, and it's important. The highest contrast is black on white or white or black to reach that. And yeah, you can check that by tools or something else, and it can be really automated and not. It's more difficult to get someone to design that than to fix it and see it's an error. Yeah, sometimes you know it, you're navigating with your tabulator key, and yeah, that's the thing what is a must-have in a standard, because some people have one arm, as said before, they must operate the whole website or something else, a product or something on your app with the keyboard. It must be all content operable by keyboard. For example, the hardest thing to do is drag and drop by keyboard. You have also to implement an alternative for drag and drop if your site uses drag and drop. Really, all content must be operable by keyboard. Then you maybe know it from ORF or some other news, all non-text content must have alternatives. For example, I think we are streaming, and I don't think we have some live subtitles. So anyone who can't hear can't imagine what I'm saying here. He only sees the slides and not anything what I'm talking about. And that's not a nice to have, it's a must have, because other one he don't understand the whole thing. Then maybe an easier one, navigation. Normally you do it, but some sites change the navigation from site to site. It's absolutely necessary to have the same navigation on every site, because it's you're navigating around and you don't have to remark everything where it is and so on. You really know, on the left side there's that key point, there's that key point, and so on. And so there it's a must-have to be consistent. Said before, in AAA and for banking services in the European Accessibility Act, it's necessary to have B2 language level. And yeah, that's not an easy thing. I don't think that any contract or something else is in Austria written in B2. Normally it's written in C1 or either in C2. C2 is mother language, which can't be reached by anyone other than the one who is speaking it from small up. And yeah, last but not least, all content must be parsable, for example, by a screen reader. It must be possible to technically read your site and really say, yeah, how it can be parsed and so on. Normally it's done by HTML in your Chrome browser, but if you're using other apps, you have to present that as a parsable API endpoint or something else. It's differ from product to product. In web development, normally if you do HTML good, it's very easy to reach that parsable thing. Maybe some easy steps or quick wins you can do to fulfill that. Yeah, as said before, if you're developing something, yeah, try to navigate your site with your keyboard only. Take away your mouse, navigate your site and say, yeah, I will try to do everything with the keyboard only. It's maybe on the first thing a little bit annoying, but yeah, it's very easy to reach. Yeah, be HTML. Try to really write HTML and not to write anything which is not able to be parsed by the screen reader or something else or by the browser. Try a screen reader on your own. There are really some good tutorials on YouTube. Check it out and really hear what is the thing that if you don't see the screen, what's happening? Is it really understandable what you're presenting with text? It's only text for the screen reader, no other things. Yeah, use a contrast tracker tool, that is more example, a browser extension or something in that way. And yeah, there is from the W3 really some more steps you can do. There's really easy steps. If you do that, you have a very quick win. It's very important for your customers and you really reach, I think, maybe 20 rules of the 78 can be reached by these easy steps. Yeah, maybe some example from that thing. I put in there some HTML code. Who can say me from that image source what's the content of the picture? Is there anyone in the room who can say, yeah, the real content of that picture? Yeah, it's a statistic. Yeah. Normally you can do the same thing, yeah. You say on a first description, yeah, it's a statistic about disabilities in Europe. And yeah, you provide a very long description, for example, on another HTML site, where you say there's a longer description where you really say, yeah, what's going on in that case, statistic or something else. But without these two things, the screen reader only say, yeah, there's a picture, which name is statistic PNG. There's no case, you can't do anything, maybe by AI, but it should not the case that any AI should pass your site and say, yeah, that's on the picture. Always try to do some text for your screen reader users. Yeah. Maybe some recap, how to be accessible. I took that things from my supervisor for my PhD, but I think it's a very good slide to really recap the whole thing. Please be always aware and understand. Really make it part of your engineering process, talk to your colleagues, say, yeah, we really need to integrate it in our process. It's really important to do that thing. Yeah. Take some other users, real users. It can be on the personal side, you can do it by Zoom or something else. Diversity really improves usability and accessibility. It not says, yeah, you fulfill any standard, but yeah, it's a good diversity thing to say, yeah, that's working, that's not working, or something in that case. As all other things, start early. Don't do accessibility after all is finished and say, yeah, now we do it, we try it. Sometimes you have to rework your whole site and really say, yeah, it's not working. We have, for example, drag and drop. If you don't do it from the first side on, it could be that you can, delete all and start from the ground up. Standards, support standards. Without them, any users, for example, AT with screen reader user, assistive technology users, they rely on them. Without standards, they can't understand your site. The screen reader can't parse it or something else, and they didn't understand anything. Use techniques and tools. Almost all platforms have them. For example, if you can't do it other side, you can use in the browser, it's called ARIA. You can there some ARIA labels to label something which is not the standard HTML part to say, yeah, that's a button or something else. You can do really good things, but use them only if necessary. Always use before HTML and then try to use the techniques and tools you are provided by your platforms. Evaluate accessibility. In all steps, first on the design. If your designer is doing something where the color contrast is not matching, you can't do it in your development phase. Yeah, you can see it's not matching, but then you have to go the step back, they have to redesign it, and in some cases you have redevelopment because they changed the old design. It's all in every step you have to do the same things. Try to integrate accessibility. And last but not least, follow best practice. Share results and join the community. There's a really great community out there on GitHub, on W3C. Share your experiences on Stack Overflow. Many people trying to do that, and you're not the first person who have to solve some special problems. Really try to share your knowledge and try to help others and take your help which you need with you. And my last slide, I know it was not as technical as usable at the talk, but I think it's a really thing to say at last. It's not a nice to have accessibility. It's a human right to have it. Without accessibility, you exclude up to 20% from people, from your spaces, from a product and from your services. And with that slide, I will hand over to any questions. You can contact me afterwards or you can drink a beer with me. Thank you very much. And I hope you have something to think about.
Hello. Yeah.
Hi.
This time it works on the first try. Do you know, or do you have any experience with making map widgets accessible?
Which widgets?
Maps, like Google Maps or something you embed in your website.
I have no experience with maps because it's very difficult to make maps accessible. There is another researcher on the GKU which is focusing on that topic.
Okay, thank you.
What's the difference between the upcoming accessibility guideline and the one from 2016?
The from 2016 is only for public organizations. This one is for private organizations, for example, and banking and all e-commerce.
Okay, it's just for the one from 2016 was just for the public ones.
Yeah,
right?
just for the public ones, like Arbeiterkammer or something like that.
Okay, interesting.
Thanks.
Will this also affect now, like say if you're building a web application that's only used internally in your company?
Not up to now. But the European Union is planning in their whole strategy that 2030 or 2029 it's coming up that also internal or applications are affected by that. It will come, but up to now it's only for customer applications.
Okay, I have one other question if I'm allowed. How do you bring that topic to management as a simple software developer?
How I bring it to that? With some slides in German like that. It's really normally without the rules and so on. But normally I have 5 to 6 slides which I'm presenting that to the management. It's really not an easy topic, I know. But yeah, you have to do it.
My guess is just there would be many Gegenwinds because it will cost money.
Yeah, that's always the question. How much would we go and what do we have to do?
I have a question about, is this also applicable to normal software, so just fat clients or something like that?
Yeah, if you are providing it in the topics which I mentioned before, for example, e-commerce, and you're providing a product with normal software, you have to fulfill that standards too.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question as well. Is there an estimate on how much more it costs to develop something accessible compared to not?
In my opinion, it's only if you start early. If you do it afterwards, normally it's doubled, the development costs are doubled. If you do it from the startup, it's 10 to 20%, in my personal opinion.
Thanks. And one more question regarding the financial aspect. You mentioned that accessibility is a human right. How do you argue against people who don't see it like that?
I think we can talk afterwards at the break.
Thanks.
Maybe one last question for me. Do you know if I program games online, will those be affected as well if they're web pages or if they're web hosted?
In my opinion, it's a product which you provide to people, and therefore you have to do it. But I think someone who is responsible for the law in your company or something else have to see if it's really in the law.
Regarding the games question, small follow-up, because basically this would then include the whole Steam catalog?
Maybe if they serve their products in Europe, but I'm not really, it's my personal opinion, I'm not for the law. That would be the question for many companies, I think, how to fulfill and if I have to fulfill that. For example, banking services are mentioned there, but games are not mentioned in there. There you have to discuss, is it a product or not?
Only if you have microtransactions.
Yeah.
So I think there's no further questions. Thank you very much for the talk.
Thank you.
And while David is setting up, another quick service announcement. There was a call for another office tour. So we'll do another office tour of the first floor after the last talk. We'll meet in the front next to the triangular table, and Maria will do it again. Maybe while we're waiting, another announcement. We're streaming the whole thing to YouTube. So if there's any friends of yours who haven't been able to join today, send them the link afterwards and like and subscribe and stuff like that. And ring the bell or something like that. Yeah, it's there.
Better now? Yeah, you can hear me. That's good. So, last talk for tonight. Something about testing so you can relax and fall asleep. And no, hopefully not. So, I wrote this little app. That's the architecture. Basic architecture. Yeah, I know that's the basic architecture of every website. But yeah, let me quickly show you. Are you seeing? Yeah, you're seeing my other screen. That's good. So here's the app. It lets you play Hangman. It's really just a little Angular application and an Express.js server. And of course, React would have been the correct choice for the front end, but I made this for a client which was an Angular shop. So, and no, they did not want a Hangman application. They wanted a quick demo of packed testing. So that's why I wrote it. Want to give it a try? A. Well, I should focus. Yeah, good. Anyone else? S. So no, that was a wrong try. Yeah, and that's basically it. The whole application is mostly untested, and it's also pretty buggy. And at least one of the bugs is caused by a misunderstanding of the interface between the client and the server. So the client and the server have a different view of how the interface, the REST interface, should work. And now we're trying to find that bug. And that's really all I want to do today. So today I first want to talk about how we could find this bug in a traditional way. With integration testing and integrated testing, I also want to mention the differences J.B. Rainsberger defined it between the two. And then we'll try to find the bug by testing completely locally in every part of the service. We'll try to use contract testing, and then I want to show you how Pact, which is a tool, an open source tool, can help you with contract testing. And a few more words about how you can effectively use Pact and the Pact broker. Yeah, so integration testing would basically work like that. We're writing a test, and this would do some action in the system under test, which would perform a REST request, get an answer, and then we could observe the state changes in our front end and make some assertions on the state, on the changed state, right? So that's basically integration testing or end-to-end testing, how we would do it. Or when we have two microservices, we can do the same thing. We can perform some action on the system under test, call a REST service or send a Kafka message or whatever. Then the service will do something, maybe call another service, get a result, change some state, and we can observe that and do some assertion. And by doing that, we would absolutely be able to find the bug that I mentioned before that probably no one of you have seen because I didn't mention it while I was showing the app. So we could find it like that, but there are some difficulties. We'll probably need some test environment, or at least if we want to do it like that, we have to spin up the client and the server at the same time. We have to make sure that they are running, and deploy them in a test environment, but they need to be running, and then we need some test data management. So in this case, Hangman is pretty much stateless. We can start the game, play until it ends, and that's not a problem. But suppose you're working at Amazon and you have to spin up all of Amazon, and then someone deleted the customer account your test needs, and then all your tests are failing. So the end-to-end testing like that is pretty difficult, and believe me, you don't want to do that for all of your tests. So the end-to-end test I described right now is what J.B. Rainsberger calls an integrated test, where he says an integration test, where he says an integrated test is a test where whether the test passes or fails depends on more than one non-trivial piece of functionality being correct. So it tests more than one thing, basically, while an integration test really tests only the integration between one part and the other, so it tests only one thing. And the integrated tests we had like that would act on the whole service, Then the service does whatever it needs to do, and then we have the assert. And this integrated test tests everything that's inside here. And if one of those pieces fails, the test fails, and it fails for the wrong reason, because we actually wanted to test this integration and not this piece that failed. And it could get worse. This picture is pretty simple, but if we wanted to test a larger application with multiple services, maybe multiple network calls, different communication technologies in a really integrated way, it gets pretty hard to write those tests, to do the test data management. The tests become brittle and slow most of the time. So can we do better? We can try to replace some of our integrated tests, probably not all of them, but some of them with integration tests, where we really just test the integration between our system and service B. So we probably still need to spin up service B in a test environment or in a test container, but to test the integration of service A, we really only need to test this last part here that communicates with service B. So we could act something here, maybe with a unit testing framework or something like that. Then this part would do the network communication, and we could observe the state and assert only here. So those tests are easier to write. They are usually faster. They are usually more stable. Test data management is still a problem if you're running them against the test environment, but if you spin up service B on demand in a test container, and if you maybe mock all the dependencies of service B, then they can also be very stable, and the test data management actually becomes much easier. So the pros and cons of this again. So the integrated tests are pretty comprehensive. They test all of the application, and they can serve as smoke tests. So I can start everything or deploy a new microservice to an environment and then run 3 of those integrated tests, and if nothing smokes, then it's probably okay. But the cons are they are probably slower than other kinds of tests. They are probably harder to write, and all the parts must be running. Yeah, hard to maintain, hard to write, and it's hard to pin failures because a single test could fail for 1,000 different reasons, and then we have to search which reason was it, why did it fail. Integration tests are often easier to maintain. The test can run locally, and it might even be possible to spin up the thing you're integrating with locally. They are usually faster, and test data setup can be easier. But they do not test a complete workflow, so they are not as usable as smoke tests. But can we do even better? Can we test everything locally? Yeah, probably for most of those tests. Not all of them. You still need some integrated tests, you still need some integration tests, but you can test a lot of things locally when you do contract testing. And contract testing basically means that you have 2 parts. Here I drew 2 UML classes, but whatever. And there's an interface in between. And you can basically test this side of the interface. Oh, I'm using the same color here. And this side independently. So you can test here if this participant uses the interface correctly, if it can process all correct answers from the interface, and if whatever is behind the interface gives some errors or wrong answers or whatever, if it can also process those and doesn't crash and does behave in a reasonable way. And then on the other side, on this side, you can test whether the other participant who's providing the interface can process all correct messages that come in, whether it handles errors correctly, and whether it produces the correct error messages. And we could do so by using a mock here. And then the test would act here, act with a T, call the mock, get a response from the mock, and then would either assert the changed state in this participant or verify the calls to this mock. And then here we can write normal unit tests where we act through the interface here and assert the result. So this technique allows us to test the two participants in this communication independently if the tests on the one side and the tests on the other side match. So if we have a test here that tests whether the tests are giving a wrong call in here, getting an error message and processing that error message works, then we also need a test here that makes the wrong call and checks whether the correct error message comes. If the tests do not match, then this does not give us confidence that the system as a whole will work. And this is where some of those memes where you see all unit tests pass, but everything breaks down comes from, that the tests of the different participants do not match. Yeah, but we don't have two classes in simple unit tests. We have a bigger system with an Angular client and an Express.js server. And but here we can do the same thing. We can test the Angular client by even by just calling a subset of the Angular client, doing some act here, then observing the HTTP traffic with an HTTP mock, and then asserting here. And here we can do something similar. We can do an HTTP request in our act, maybe have some class here and then a mock, or test the whole service. We can do whatever we want here and assert the result. But when we do it like that, we cannot really replace our integrated tests and our integration tests with that, because we do not gain the confidence that the tests above and below match. And that's where Pact comes into the game, because Pact allows us to make sure that both sets of tests match. And it does so by making us write only one set. So it's a tool that simplifies consumer-driven contract testing. And it basically works like that we still do the test here that we had. We act, run something against an HTTP mock, and assert the result. Or we could also do the act on the whole client application or on just the business logic, whatever. We are here free to decide. The point is that Pact records those calls and what the client expected in the test in a file or on a server, or there's different ways how Pact could record those. And then the tests on the other hand, Pact does automatically, it replays what it did record against the other side, and then verifies that the provider of the interface returned a correct result. And for the rest of this talk, for the 15 or so remaining minutes, I want to show you in the code that we just saw how this works in practice. Oh, we still have. Wait a second. Quickly gonna delete this. Better. Okay, so this is the application, and on. I can maybe zoom a bit. Better? Yeah. Can you see it in the back? Okay, so here I'm on the client side. I'm basically doing standard Angular tests with Karma and Jasmine, and I just installed in my package JSON some dependencies for Pact. So we need Pact Web and basically Karma Pact to be able to run Pact tests as normal Angular tests. And then the tests look like that. The first test tests whether the client actually starts a new game. So starting a new game looks like that on the server. Oh, yeah. Starting a new game is just a post request to the resource games, and it returns an HTTP status 201 with a game ID. So the first test really just checks whether this interaction does happen on the client side. So everything here in the first part sets up Pact, the expectations. So it says the provider is now expecting an interaction, and the interaction is start a new game. And starting a new game means that there is a post request to /games. And when this happens, it will respond with status code 201 and a body that has an ID that looks like the string 1234. So this matches.like first provides an example that is valid so that the client can process it. And second, it adds an expectation, in this case, that the type must be string, what the server returns. We could also check regular expressions here or do more sophisticated checks on the return value, but here I'm just saying it must be a string. And for the purpose of the test, the mock server will return 1234. And then once I have set up Pact, I will do the act on my service, which is I call connect to the correct URL. And then I observe the loaded status of the service. So after starting the game, at some point, the service will say, okay, the game is now fully loaded. And then I expect that the game ID equals 1234. And this is all I test that should happen when starting a new game. I could also write the same test by checking the UI of the application, but then I don't think it would provide much more value than that, but it would be more brittle. Because the UI might change and then the test doesn't run anymore, and this is probably more stable. And I really just want to test the interaction between this Angular client and the REST API, and so I only have to test the Angular service that is actually doing the HTTP calls. And the second Pact test here is that when I guess a letter, so when I press the letter A, then some service call will be done that should send this letter to the server. So again, I set up the test that upon receiving a guessed letter A, something should happen. But here I have another configuration. I say the server must be in a state where a game with this ID is already running. So I'm doing this because I could also just start the game and then guess the letter, but that would again make the test brittle again because it would depend on the other test being green. And here I'm just saying the game must already be running, and then when a post request to guesses with the letter A is done by the client, the server will just respond with status 201. And then the test doesn't even have an assert, it just guesses the letter A and then says I'm done. Because here I'm really only testing the packed interaction. I'm not, there's nothing interesting happening after the server returned 201 here that I could test. So we can look into this guess method. It really just returns the response from the server. It doesn't do anything interesting. But it makes this post, and it sends a body, and we want to make sure that the body we are sending is correct, which we're doing with this expectation here. And we also later want to make sure that the server can process this. So those are tests that I can run here. Then they're hopefully green. And since this is Karma and not a reasonable test framework, it starts a browser, and my Linux browser is outdated, so it takes longer, but it will finish eventually. And did I mention that I should have written this in React? Then I would have a reasonable test framework. But the tests are green, and now not only the tests were green, which was almost expected because they don't test very much, but they did do something else interesting. They wrote a packed JSON. So I'm using only files here. I'm not using a server or anything. But here we say that we have a contract between the consumer, which is called Angular client, and the provider, which is called game server, which is really just, at this point, just a name. And the interactions are, it can start a new game where this request is expected, and it will return this response, status 201, no headers, a body with this ID. And it has matching rules. The ID is matched only by type. So the types must be compatible. They must be strings, basically. And the other interaction looks pretty similarly. This request is expected, then it must respond 201, and yeah, there's no matching rules because there's nothing to match here. So when I run this test on the server, packed will automatically replay those two requests against the server, and then check whether the response of the server was compatible with what we were expecting here. And we exceeded a timeout, maybe. We should probably stop this other test. But I did stop all my servers, right? Just did not exit. Okay. Oh, but yeah, that's a little bit embarrassing, this error message, but we saw here that actually both tests were okay. So start a new game did return with status 201 and had a matching body, and guessing letter A did return 201 and had a matching body because there was no body that was expected. And how does that work on the server side? We basically also have to implement this test. And here at first I'm starting up the server. So in this case, the complete server, because it doesn't make any difference. The server is simple enough so that I can start up everything. And then I have only one test which says packed verification. And packed will run this one test and replay all the requests against the server. And I say that there's the base URL is this, the provider name is game server. That's how it finds the relevant requests in the files that are provided or in the packed broker if you're using a server. Then here I'm pointing to exactly the JSON file that we saw before that the client did write. And then we have state handlers where we have only one state. When the client expects that a game is running with this ID, then we start this game before doing anything else. And then the test itself just says verify the provider. And this verify provider will replay all the requests from the JSON file and check the results. Yeah, so let's write another packed test and see if we can find the bug. So what we did here is we checked whether we can start a new game with this connect and whether we can test the letter. What's the next thing that's happening in the game? The next thing was here we did guess the letter. That was the post. And the next thing was a get on the game ID itself. And this did return some JSON. Why doesn't it look better? This returned a JSON, which basically the most interesting thing here is this placeholder that we were displaying here. So that's the next test I'm going to write. And I'm going to copy this one because I don't want to write everything again. And I say it gets the game status. This test expects a running game, so I don't want to test starting the game again. Get game status. It does a get on games/ID. So that's what we are expecting the client to do. And this should respond with, well, what should it respond with? Let's check here. Status returns a game status. And game status from the client's point of view is this one. So I can just copy this, paste it here into the body. It will probably not look very good, but I don't care. Oh, even looks okay-ish. So let's say it returns 0 guesses, 0, 1 guesses, but actually we want to match it. The placeholder is an array containing strings or nulls, so let's assume it returns null null. And let's say it returns the status running. And the HTTP status is actually 200 here because we didn't create anything, we just asked for some information. And this should happen when, I'm going to use this one here. This should happen when we have a running game here and this base URL and we call status. So, fingers crossed that this test is still running and not providing any embarrassing test framework errors. That did not come during rehearsal. Don't have to believe me, but it was like that. So the parser expected something because I have a syntax error, which is again embarrassing. I did not enter describe block, right? Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And even the editor did tell me. I thought oh, no, I did not close this it. Or did I? This whole it block comes here. Der ganze Describe. Nice.
Describe starting a new game. Und
Ja.
dann describe getting the game started. Oder?
Line 86 needs to be removed.
Line 86?
Yeah, remove that. Because 85 ends the describe.
No, 85 ends the it.
Oh. Yeah, but there is no new start describe block. There's one.
Yeah, but it.
Undescribed.
Ich habe zwei, ja.
Es sind nur zwei Describe-Blöcke da, oder?
Genau. Steuerung Shift I. Steuerung Shift I. Ja, warte. Ja. It should only be used in describe function. Okay, again, this describe block, I'm now doing what Thomas told me. Wahrscheinlich nicht. Ist ja ein Funktionsaufruf. So, das ist das it, das ist das describe. Dann haben wir das describe. Yes, Chrome. Yeah. Thank you. So let's review the pact again that was created. It's actually here. So now we have another entry for getting the game status, and we can test this against the server, which will probably give us that stupid error message again, but run the tests. No, it did not run the tests. Oh, it did run the tests, which says getting the game status has failed because it does not have a matching body. And here down here it says that the map was missing the keys, guesses and wrong guesses. So the server just did not return the two keys that the client was expecting. And then we can look into the server why it did do that. Oh yes, because the server thinks that it only has to return the guesses when there are guesses, and otherwise it doesn't return them. So let's remove this code, because it's obviously wrong. The client did expect guesses to be there always, not only when there are some. Same with wrong guesses. And run the tests again, and now all three here should be green again. And yeah, we found a bug by testing the client and the server independently. What did I win here? Not much, because I wrote the client and the server, and it's in total less than 200 lines of code. But if this was on the client a big micro front-ends architecture, and on the server a big microservices architecture and multiple teams involved, then every team would have been able to just test their part and find the bug. So it's on the one hand, it's a testing tool. On the other hand, it can be a communication tool. And I'm already slightly over time, but just quickly, I now used files to communicate between the server and the client. You would not want to do this in a production environment. There you should use a server which is called Pact Broker in this case. So that's the server software for Pact, and it does not only record the pass or fail state of a consumer and a provider, it also records their version. So it can say something like version 2 of the consumer can work with version 3, 4, 5, and 6 of the provider, and vice versa. And you can use a hosted version on Pactflow, or you can run your own if you really want that. I guess that you should not want to do that because for such basic software like that, probably paying something to run it for you is easier and more hassle-free than running it yourself. And what you can do here, I already mentioned that you can, on the consumer side, run the pact tests and publish the pacts, which can then, via webhooks, automatically trigger provider tests for this version of the consumer. Then the provider build would run, check against this new version of the consumer. If the verification fails, the build fails, then this provider is not compatible with the new consumer version. If it passes, then it checks whether it can deploy the provider. So you can use Pact to check whether you can deploy this provider in a test environment, and then you can deploy it if you want. And then you can go back to the consumer and run the can I deploy test again with the consumer to check whether you can deploy the consumer. And Pact does this by using a matrix with different consumer and provider versions, and where it records whether they can work together or not, whether they are verified or not. And you can use the Pact CLI to record a deployment. So in this case, we recorded deployment of the provider in the production environment. Now Pact knows that version 56 of the provider runs in the production environment, and that this is compatible with version 22 and 23 of the consumer. And then we can check, can I deploy for the consumer? So when we check, can I deploy for the consumer with version 23 to the production environment, then the computer says yes. Great, we can, because version 23 is compatible with the running version 56 of the provider. And it does not work with the version 24 of the consumer. So to recap, Pact can help you find some communication problems in your system early, and you might be able to use it to replace many, but not all, of your integration and integrated tests and end-to-end tests. Yeah, my name is David. I'll be here if you want to talk later. I'm working as a trainer, consultant, and coach. I'm also on Mastodon, and yeah, the slides are already on speaker deck, and if you have any questions, then you can ask them now.
So, if I understood it correctly, you still have to run it once, then you capture all the requests, you save them, and then you replay them later on, right?
Yes, yes. So Pact is consumer-driven. So you first test the consumer. You can either test it against an HTTP mock if you have a REST interface, or there's also a message pact where you can test message queues or Kafka or something like that. But you first run the consumer test. This will record all the interactions of the consumer and the expected results, and then it will automatically replay the interactions with the provider.
But doesn't that add another failure scenario where you have outdated captures? So if the client records the requests for version 1 and then the server updates to version 2 and the client uses the old captured request, or the server uses the old one?
Then if you run the can I deploy checks, then can I deploy for the server would say no, because there is no compatible client running in the production environment that can work with version 2.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Maybe a follow-up to that. In a more complex non-hangman scenario, you would probably involve some caching also on client side, which again makes the client kind of a provider. Do you have any experience or even advice how to add that to the testing scenario? Because you would rather want to test the cache as part of the whole setting. And
so
that makes it difficult to record something.
You know, in the real world, at a client where we're using this, we're only using message pact, and we do not cache messages, so I have no experience with how you would handle caching. But you probably would have to make sure that you always run the tests on the client with an empty cache. Then you would still hit the mock server, and the mock server could still record the tests.
But you wouldn't really test the cache then, in the sense of the provider actually knows about the life cycle of the objects that it is providing, which means the caching strategy has kind of be defined there, but will be implemented by the consumer team, typically.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of lose that connection then. So the consumer team can only test an empty cache, and there cannot much go wrong with an empty cache.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the caching on the consumer side is part of the contract, or if whether you would test it with a normal integration test or unit test. So I really don't have any real world experience with that scenario.
Okay, thank you.
What's the solution to the hangman puzzle, Tanzer?
I'd
be really curious.
Oh, to this? Ah, okay. Oh shit, I stopped the server. We can try a new one. Or I could show you the dictionary. It only knows 7 words.
It's generated words. Never mind then.
So it knows exactly those words: weasel, hangman, word, the, insurance, game, random, code, and craft, and that's it. So it was one of those. More questions? Or we can later talk over a beer. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much for joining us for this Technologieplauscherl. We can stay here for quite some more time. There's lots more beer left and a little bit of food left. There will be another office tour starting in the front in a few minutes. If there's any questions to us, or if you want to know anything more about Cloudflight, go to anybody with a Cloudflight t-shirt and we'll be happy to talk to you about it. Other than that, see you again next time.